Hey there, thanks for tuning into this story. If you haven't subscribed yet, take a second to hit that button. It really helps the channel grow. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Together, we'll face the unknown. Now let's get into the story. I knew the world was on the brink of change when the midday sky turned a strange pale color. Sunlight still streamed in through the tall glass windows in my office, but something felt off, like the air was charged with static. I was standing behind my mahogany desk, staring at the phone, wondering why the calls had gone silent. On most days my phone would be buzzing, clients in high places, officials who owed me a favor, and terrified people who needed my expertise all kept my line busy. But that day, something was different. For once, it felt like time had stopped. Even the hum of the air conditioner was unnerving. I glanced at my reflection in the tinted glass. My tailored suit looked perfect, not a wrinkle to be seen. A practiced half-smile curved my lips, the one I used whenever I closed a particularly shady deal. I kept telling myself that everything was fine, that I'd get the phone calls I needed, yet my gut told me otherwise. It began with a short, frantic message on the local news. Please stay indoors. Civil authorities are advising everyone to remain calm. We are experiencing some form of rapidly spreading infection. The anchor's voice trembled. Then the screen went black. At the time, I just frowned and tried changing channels, but every station showed the same loop. A warning, a worried face, then static. I had planned to meet a client in an hour, a high-profile figure who was knee-deep in a scandal that I had been paid handsomely to help cover up. My typical approach was to bury evidence, intimidate witnesses, and find obscure legal loopholes. When I tried calling him, the line just rang and rang. Eventually, all I heard was an eerie silence. The city outside my window seemed caught between business as usual and growing chaos. People moved quickly down the sidewalks, some frantically checking their phones. Cars sped by in a near panic, but horns and screeching tires weren't uncommon in this part of town. I told myself it was just another day of city life. A clang from the hallway made me jump. The building's janitor, a kind older man, stumbled past my open door. Under normal circumstances, I would barely notice him. This time, I caught a glimpse of panic on his face, a mixture of confusion and something like fear. "Sir, did you see the news?" he asked in a voice that shook. "They're saying people are..." "People are what?" I snapped, crossing my arms. I wanted more information, but my pride demanded I maintain a calm exterior. "People are losing themselves. They're not acting right." He swallowed, his eyes darting away. "They're calling it an outbreak. Some folks on the first floor said there were crowds outside, folks wandering around like they couldn't see straight." I opened my mouth to dismiss him, maybe even threaten him if he spread rumors, but I stopped myself. It was that same strange feeling gnawing at me again. As if to confirm the janitor's words, an alarm started blaring somewhere far below. My office, located on one of the top floors, felt safe yet suffocating. "Get back to work," I finally told the janitor, shooing him away. "I'll handle this." He scurried off without a word, and the hallway fell silent, save for the distant alarm. I decided to lock my office door, more out of a sense of power than genuine fear. The electronic lock gave a sharp beep, and I felt an odd comfort in the fact that no one could come in unannounced. I tried calling my usual list of fixers, the ones who owed me a favor, the ones who specialized in discreet tasks. None picked up. Outside the windows, a growing commotion took hold, vehicles colliding, distant shouts, and something that sounded like a siren began to resonate in the distance. It was as if every terrible scenario I'd ever exploited in court was happening all at once. I'd manipulated plenty of laws, bribed more than a few officials, and sidestepped countless moral lines. All of that felt trivial now. I snatched my car keys, deciding that staying in the office was a mistake. If something serious was unfolding, I needed to be near my resources. I needed to be at the courthouse or city hall, where I knew the right people might still be. But before I could head for the door, my smartphone vibrated. One new message. They're here on my street. They aren't normal. Stay safe. It was from my client, the high-profile figure, the one I'd planned to meet. That single text radiated dread. I tried to call back, but all I got was silence. Suddenly, another alarm went off, closer now. The lights in my office flickered. My heart pounded, and I felt the urge to run. But then the building's public address system crackled to life. Evacuate! Evacuate! This is a code red. All personnel must leave immediately. Avoid contact with suspicious individuals. Suspicious individuals? That was an understatement. I heard rushed footsteps in the corridor, a small stampede of employees, some from neighboring firms, sprinting for the elevators or the stairwell. My sense of self-preservation kicked in. I grabbed a slim metal case from my drawer, containing crucial documents and emergency funds, and tried to steady my breathing. When I stepped into the hallway, I saw a crowd at the elevator. The digital panel above flickered as if it were confused about which floor to service next. The stamping of feet echoed, accompanied by whispers laced with panic. Nobody seemed to know exactly what was happening, only that it was bad. The law firm across from mine was dark. Employees who normally worked late were gone, leaving half-filled coffee cups behind. I made my way toward the stairs. If the building was as unstable as it felt, the elevator was a risk I wasn't willing to take. Halfway to the stairwell, a frantic intern from my office barreled into me. I recognized him. Pale face, trembling hands. He mumbled something about people on the lower floors acting strange, drifting like they were in a daze. "Stay calm," I told him, though my own voice quivered. "We'll get out of here. Where's the rest of the team?" He just shook his head and sped off without another word. Unhelpful, I thought, but my conscience twinged. Normally, I wouldn't care about an intern's safety unless it benefited me in some way. Now I wondered if I'd ever see him again. I reached the stairwell. A number of people were descending, clutching briefcases and purses. Over the clatter of footsteps, I thought I heard a distant moaning noise rising from below. Then the crowd slowed. The moaning grew louder. I peered over the railing and caught glimpses of forms moving unnaturally on the flights below. Everyone froze. A woman near me let out a soft cry. We couldn't go down. Not if those shapes were down there. As if reading our minds, a group behind us turned to run back up. The tension snapped. We pushed and bumped into one another, a knot of people in business attire desperately trying to flee something unseen. I was swept along in the chaos, cursing under my breath. My carefully curated composure was gone. When I managed to break free, I dashed to the 15th floor. The hallway lights were flickering, and only one set of emergency bulbs offered a faint glow. I used the same passcode from my own office to unlock a vacant suite I'd once shown to a client. The door hissed open. I hurried inside and locked it. The vacant suite was a cold maze of empty cubicles. The overhead lights were dead, and the floor felt colder than usual. An eerie quiet settled here, broken only by a hum from the building's ventilation system. I tried flipping on the lights. Nothing. I was more alone than I'd ever been in my life. Normally, that suited me just fine. I was a lone wolf, content to orchestrate deals and manipulate outcomes without personal attachments. But now, the isolation felt suffocating. Even the hum of technology was gone. As I crept past rows of unused desks, I peered out of a broad window overlooking the city. The roads below were swarmed with vehicles at bizarre angles, some with doors wide open, abandoned in the middle of intersections. I saw random clusters of people stumbling. The infected, if that's what they were, didn't move like normal crowds. They shuffled, heads tilted at odd angles. Occasionally, I saw one lunge toward a passerby. I felt a surge of panic and scrambled back from the window. My breathing turned shallow, but I forced myself to calm down. I needed a plan. I recalled the building's layout, a subterranean garage with service tunnels that once led to a nearby subway station. They were primarily used for maintenance staff and deliveries. If the main entrances were overwhelmed, Maybe I could get out through those tunnels. The problem was reaching them. The infected seemed to be filling the lower floors of the building. Yet if I stayed up here, I'd be trapped. The worst part was the knowledge that nobody was coming to rescue me. With all communication down, I couldn't call in any favors or rely on the authorities. Not this time. Shaking, I set my sights on a small flashlight left behind in a supply closet, probably part of some emergency kit. It was the first piece of good fortune I'd had all day. Clutching it, I made my way out of the vacant suite and back to the corridor, determined to reach the service stairwell that went to the basement levels. The corridor lights were dim, but functional enough to show me the scattered office chairs and paperwork strewn about. I nearly tripped over a fallen potted plant. The building's alarm system still hissed, urging evacuation in an endless loop. I found the service stairwell behind an unmarked metal door. It was usually locked, but the panic must have caused someone to prop it open with a broken chair. Inside, it was dark. I clicked on my flashlight and shone it downward, seeing only steps, endless steps, disappearing into blackness. A pungent odor hit me, something stale and musty. Trying to ignore it, I began the descent. My footsteps echoed in the confined space, and each step felt heavier than the last. The moaning sounds from earlier were gone, replaced by a hush that made my hair stand on end. Down one flight, then two, then three. I lost count of how many floors I'd passed. I was somewhere near the 10th floor landing when I froze. A figure stood just below me, leaning against the wall. My flashlight beam swept across its back. At first I thought it was a frightened office worker who needed help. Then it turned, and I saw its face. Grayish complexion, eyes unfocused, but locked onto the circle of light. Its posture was unnatural, twisted, as though it struggled to maintain balance. A faint sound came from its throat, like someone trying to speak but only managing a moan. I swallowed. My mind raced. Would it lunge? Could it climb stairs fast enough to catch me? I took a cautious step back. The figure limped forward, letting out a deep, breathy moan. My instinct screamed, "Run!" That's exactly what I did. I bolted back up the steps. My heartbeat thundered in my ears. Behind me I heard a shuffle, a scraping against the concrete. It was following, but not quickly. Fortunately, the infected seemed slow, at least for now. I reached the next landing, panting. I had to find another route. The main stairs were blocked by more of those things, and the service stairwell was compromised. My last chance was the network of maintenance hallways that looped around the building and might lead to the basement. I remembered an access door on the 8th floor. I needed to find it. I slipped out of the service stairwell on the 12th floor and made my way down a narrow corridor. This area was typically for custodians or mechanical technicians, so everything smelled of cleaning supplies and warm metal. Flickering lights gave the space a haunted atmosphere. An exit sign glowed faintly, pointing to a cross-section of hallways. I followed it, carefully rounding each corner. My heart pounded every time I heard a distant clank or hiss of air. Was it a broken pipe or something else? Finally, I reached a metal door labeled Maintenance Only. The handle turned with ease. It was unlocked. Inside, the hum of machinery was louder, and warm air rushed out. A row of water pipes lined the walls. A single fluorescent bulb flickered overhead. This was, in essence, a utility floor. If I could traverse it, I'd get closer to the basement and the service tunnels. The tension I felt was unlike anything I'd experienced before. In my work, I'd known excitement. I'd felt the rush of outsmarting opponents in court, of making questionable deals that paid off handsomely. But this was raw fear, the kind that sinks into your bones and won't let go. I hurried through the corridor, checking every corner with my flashlight. So far, no sign of infected. A whisper of hope told me this might be the safe route. If I could just reach the tunnels, I'd slip out under the streets and emerge somewhere less crowded. I paused at a junction where the corridor branched in 3 directions. The overhead sign was faded, but I discerned an arrow indicating boiler room to the left, electrical straight ahead, and storage to the right. My plan required the boiler room route, since it connected to the main basement. As I stood there, I thought I heard footsteps echo from the corridor behind me. Not the slow shuffle I'd heard before, but quick, frantic steps. I pressed myself against the wall, flashlight off, trying to steady my breathing. A figure rushed past the junction. A person, not one of the infected. I could see the outline of what looked like a security guard's uniform. He was panting heavily and gripping what appeared to be a flashlight of his own. He never glanced in my direction. He just kept running. For a second I considered calling out, but I stopped myself. If he was fleeing something behind him, drawing attention might be a bad idea. My heart thumped. The footsteps faded, and I clicked the flashlight on again, this time pointed at the floor. I followed the sign to the boiler room, walking as quickly as I dared. My lawyer instincts told me to weigh every risk, but at that moment, I was running on pure survival mode. My arrogance, the belief that I could control every situation, was crumbling. The boiler room was large, filled with metal tanks and an array of pipes that hissed gently. It was warmer here, the air thick with humidity. I moved along the narrow pathway between machines, searching for a door that would lead me further down. Then I found it, a heavy door labeled Basement Access. My heart soared. If it was unlocked, I might finally reach the service tunnels. I turned the handle, and yes, it moved freely. Stepping through, I felt a rush of stale air that smelled of damp concrete. The basement was pitch black, save for the faint beam from my flashlight. Pipes and overhead cables crisscrossed the ceiling. The floor was coated with dust, and footprints crisscrossed in multiple directions, maintenance workers who had come and gone, or perhaps desperate employees who had tried to escape. I walked slowly, making as little noise as possible. My polished dress shoes clicked on the floor, and I grimaced at every sound. In the distance, I saw a sign that read, Service Tunnel Entrance. That was the golden ticket. If it was still clear, I could exit this building through a discreet underground path that led to the next block over, a route I'd sometimes used to avoid paparazzi or curious investigators. Suddenly, I heard movement to my left, a low scuffling sound, as if someone was dragging their feet. I froze. My flashlight pointed straight ahead. The noise grew louder, and I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. I risked shining the beam towards the source. A person stood near a cluster of old crates. Their clothes were disheveled, face turned away from me. They didn't sway or groan like the infected. My initial thought was relief. Maybe it was someone normal. But the figure didn't respond to my presence, even though my flashlight was directly on them now. "Hey," I managed, my voice echoing in the gloom. "Are you okay?" The figure turned slowly, as if compelled by an unseen force. The reflection of my flashlight in their eyes sent a shiver up my spine. They made a soft sound, halfway between a gasp and a moan. Then they took a single halting step toward me. Fear kept me rooted, but a primal instinct told me to back away. The overhead pipes dripped water, and the plink of droplets felt unnaturally loud. As the figure came closer, I saw a flicker of recognition in their eyes, but then it vanished. A deep, labored breath came from them, and I knew, with sudden clarity, that this person was not in control anymore. I stepped backward, trying to keep the flashlight steady. The figure lurched forward again with more purpose this time. I could see that their clothes bore tears, and their posture was unnaturally stiff. My throat went dry. Without another second's hesitation, I turned and ran, flashlight bobbing in my grip. I could hear stumbling footsteps behind me, but they didn't seem fast. Still, I didn't dare look back. I just kept running, weaving around equipment and crates, until I spotted a heavy rolling door. Above it, in chipped paint, were the words, Service Tunnel Entrance. The rolling door was partly open, enough for me to slip underneath. I crouched and ducked through, inhaling the stale, cool air of an underground passage. Once inside, I groped along the walls for a way to seal the door behind me. My hand found a control panel, and I pressed a large button. The door rumbled closed, shutting out whatever was behind me. I collapsed against the wall, chest heaving. For a moment, all was quiet. Then I remembered what lay ahead. A winding, unlit tunnel that ran beneath the city, connecting to a subway access point. I had navigated it once before with a security guard guiding me. Now I would be on my own. The tunnel was cold and dripping with condensation. My footsteps echoed in the silence. Every so often, I heard a distant rumble, the subway overhead, or maybe just city infrastructure grinding to a halt. It was easy to imagine that the world above was crumbling. Yet, oddly enough, being down here gave me a strange sense of hope. If the infected were swarming the streets, the underground might be relatively clear. Perhaps I could emerge somewhere safer, or at least away from the biggest crowds. I walked for what felt like hours, though it was likely only minutes. Time had lost its usual meaning. My only focus was on the beam of the flashlight illuminating the path ahead. My mind replayed the day's events, the frantic messages, the people running, the confusion. I realized how powerless I was. All my bribes, all my carefully maintained contacts, all the cases I'd won through cunning. None of that mattered anymore. I'd spent years profiting from the vulnerabilities of others. I'd manipulated the law to protect those who broke it with impunity. Sometimes, I convinced myself that I was just providing a service, that everybody needed a good lawyer. But down here in the darkness, I felt every misdeed echo in my conscience. If the world was truly ending, I had a lot to answer for. Water dripped from the ceiling, forming shallow puddles. My shoes were soaked, my suit rumpled, and my necktie felt like a noose. The deeper I went, the more uncertain I became of my direction. I started to wonder if I had taken a wrong turn. Then I saw a small sign. Subway, 300M. Relief washed over me. As I continued, I heard something that made my stomach tighten. Faint footsteps behind me. They were irregular, like someone stumbling. My pace quickened, and the footsteps seemed to match. Sweat beaded on my forehead again, and my flashlight trembled. If the infected had managed to find a way in behind me, I might be cornered. I turned a corner and found myself at a service ladder leading up to a hatch. This might be a way out. I approached carefully, shining the flashlight upward. The hatch was about 10 feet above. My heart hammered. If it was locked from above, I'd be trapped. The footsteps behind me grew closer. A soft, ragged breathing echoed in the tunnel. With no time to lose, I placed the flashlight on a ledge and climbed. My hands slipped on the cold metal rungs, but I forced myself to keep going. At the top, I pushed the hatch. It gave slightly but didn't open. I pushed harder, straining against what felt like debris or maybe a locked mechanism. Below me, I heard a gasp, then a low moan. My pursuer was close. I slammed my shoulder into the hatch, putting all my weight into it. Finally, it creaked open an inch, letting in a sliver of light. A hand brushed my shoe, causing me to jerk in alarm. I glanced down and saw a pale face gazing up at me, mouth open. I kicked out, not aiming to hurt but desperate to free my foot. The creature's grip loosened, and I felt a surge of adrenaline. With one final effort, I shoved the hatch open enough to crawl through. I scrambled onto the floor above, then yanked the hatch shut and slid whatever heavy object was there on top of it. Panting, I realized I was in a small utility closet connected to a subway station. Light filtered in from the crack under the door. The moaning from below faded, replaced by the distant hum of fluorescent lights and the muffled sounds of a city in distress. I leaned against a wall, trying to gather myself. My phone was still useless, no signal. I needed to find my way out of the station. Maybe I could make it to a less populated area, or at least somewhere with a working phone. Carefully, I opened the closet door. The station hallway was dim, the overhead bulbs flickering. Strange, half-coherent announcements sputtered from nearby speakers. Trains are experiencing delays. Please stay. And then static. I followed the corridor to a set of stairs leading up to the main platform. Each step echoed loudly in the silence. In the distance, I heard a rumble, possibly a train trying to run on schedule. It seemed surreal. A last gasp of normalcy in a world gone wrong. When I reached the main platform, flickering station signs illuminated a few lone figures huddled near the walls. Some trembled, others stared into space. Whether they were infected or in shock, I couldn't tell. I kept my distance, crouching behind a row of benches. A door marked "Exit" caught my attention near the far side of the platform. My flashlight's batteries were running low, and I knew staying put wasn't an option. My heart pounded as I rose, each step toward the door cautious. The shadows near the walls didn't move, a sign of hope or just emptiness. Testing the handle, I felt a rush of cold air from the stairwell beyond. At the top of those stairs was the street, possibly overrun with infected, or maybe a place I could hide. For the first time, I realized there would be no rescue teams or safety net. This time, I was truly on my own. I took a deep breath, pressed the cold steel door, and stepped out into the unknown. Thank you for listening. If this story sent a shiver down your spine, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more unsettling stories. Your support keeps this channel alive. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and remember, sometimes the real horror lies in the secrets we keep.